Hey guys, we're up here. I'm going to chat to Andrew from Hilltop Hops Farm, and we're going to talk all things hops. So just be aware, I'm still recovering from a stack I had off an e-scooter, so I'm going to lisp, I'm going to say weird things and I look a bit strange, but we're cool. We're going to have a good one. Awesome. Well, thanks Andrew for having us here in this beautiful hop farm that you got going on here. How big is it first? How much land area have you got, and does that make a difference?
So we've got a 1/4 acre here that's been kind of gifted / leased to us from my hop growing partner Steve. And ordinarily in say an acre in a commercial yard, you would have 6-metre high trellis and you'd have about 1,000 plants. But they drive tractors up the rows and drive harvesters through them, and we realised straight away everything will be done manually. So we've kind of done double density planting. So at a commercial scale you would really only have about 250 plants on this footprint.
Yep.
We've got about 600.
Yeah, right. And how many hop varieties have you got across this area?
About 5 main ones, so mostly Cascade, and then Victoria, some Chinook, also from the US, Columbus from the US, Centennial from the US, and we've got a little bit of Red Earth, which is an Australian bred variety.
Very cool.
And that was done by a backyard guy in WA many years ago, just kind of maybe not a proper variety development program. That one's called Red Earth, and some people love it and some people hate it.
Yeah.
And we've got a little bit of Willamette as well, which is a US bred variety.
So it's about a week out from harvest?
Yeah, something we do different here compared to traditional growing areas like Victoria and Tasmania is when we started growing in 2017, we realised the plants just weren't growing that well and flowering was really sporadic and all over the place. We'd read about using lights to control flowering, so we did a bit of research, and we've put strung lights over the yard, and so we can actually control when the plants flower. So we trick them into thinking it's endless summer, having the lights on a timer, coming on at dusk and staying on until about 9 at night. And when the plants get big enough and hit the top wire and we're happy with their size, we turn the lights off, and then within 2 weeks of turning the lights off, they all start burring and flowering.
Yeah, okay.
So we can kind of time harvest. We can say, lights off, we'll harvest in approximately 7 weeks.
What's the difference between the hops growing and, like, say, grapes or anything like that?
Yeah, so a vine, like the characteristic of a vine is off the stem, it will throw out small tendrils and sort of hook onto things.
Yep.
Whereas a vine for hops doesn't have little tendrils. It physically just wraps around whatever the structure is it's growing on. So in nature, that's trees on a riverbank.
Yeah, okay.
Looking down, they coil clockwise around whatever they can grab. So yeah, the plants are dormant in winter, and then they wake up in spring, and that's when we get up on ladders and put coir fibre strings up, like normally 2 per plant. That's called V-stringing. And the vine, after they get a foot or 2 tall, we pick a few good vines, chop the rest off, and then train a couple per string.
There's a few of you guys. So there's another guy out at Stanthorpe, it's
Rick at Possum Lane.
Possum Lane, yeah. And then over in WA, I know there's Preston Valley hops. How many others do you know of?
I took a year off work recently, and I've got a little van, so I travelled around Australia and I visited every hop farm I could find.
Yep. Yeah.
So in southwest WA there's 7 small hop yards.
Yep.
So yeah, Preston Valley's one, and there's a handful of others. Some have been going a few years and some are just starting out. Most of those guys supply once a year, normally fresh hop ales, but some of the guys do a little bit of drying, and Aaron at Preston Valley, I believe he does a little bit of pelletizing as well. And then in Victoria there's a few, Tasmania. So after WA I came home and then went to Tassie for a few months, and I actually while I was there, HPA were harvesting.
Yep.
So randomly just drove in and said, do you need any more workers? So I worked on harvest at Bushy Park for 3 weeks, driving a tractor and loading vines into the then our harvesters, and then I worked in the baling area as well. But other itinerant workers would say, oh, what's your backstory? And when I told them I was just there for fun,
Yeah.
and they're like, we're here for money, why are you really here? And I'm like, yeah, it's my hobby, I just want to check it out. But in Tasmania there's a few hobby growers, and Victoria and New South Wales, so I've visited a lot of them. Like potentially I've visited more hop farms in Australia than anyone else ever.
We're obviously up here in Queensland, so I know because I've read about it. The reason that you need your glow lights is we're on the wrong latitude, really, aren't we? We're a lot higher up on the latitude lines where they normally do grow, where they get that natural sunlight. So is that the only struggle of growing them up here in Queensland that's a little bit different, is the amount of light that they need, or is it?
I would say that's nearly, the major factor. So the further away you are from the equator in summer, the longer the day length.
Yeah.
So historically hops have evolved in latitudes that had really long day lengths, like for example Yakima Valley, that's close to 16 hours peak day length in summer. Tasmania is kind of similar. Generally the plants are used to long summer days, and then once you hit solstice, peak day length, and the days start shortening, the plants are genetically wired to go, oh, winter is coming, we should reproduce now, we should start flowering. So here we've got 13 hours 50 of sunlight, which we found wasn't quite enough. So we've extended the day length to say more like 17, 18 hours. And like I said, when we're ready, when the plants are vegetatively big enough, we turn the lights off. And then that's when they go, oh, winter is coming, we have to flower. And it's created this really uniform flowering and harvest time, which is perfect for us. I mean, other factors that are different here and can be a challenge is winter dormancy. Normally they grow in areas where it nearly freezes, like in the US, they can have snow on the ground in hop yards, and in Tasmania it can get, and Victoria, pretty cold in winter. Our winter dormancy, it happens, but it's a milder and shorter dormancy. Anecdotally, people have said, oh yeah, it won't work in Queensland, you need that really frozen dormancy. But that might just be a bit of an urban myth. Because I know there is one uni in the US that grew hops in greenhouse conditions and just did back-to-back harvests using artificial lighting. And I think they harvested for 5
the Philips,
seasons.
like the Philips grow lights or something?
Yeah, like normal lights will work. We use grow bulbs that were recommended by Florida Uni. Like a few years ago with Rick from Possum Lane Hops, we did a...
I was going to ask you about that because you went over to Yakima Valley to do some
we did
for the hop harvest, eh?
Yeah, so initially the concept was just a holiday where and I was just going to go to the Yakima for harvest, visit a few farms and drink some fresh hop ales and go, isn't this cool? But then I worked out Florida Uni were doing research into hops, similar subtropical climate to here, and we went out and met Rick the first time, and a week later we ran into him at Moreton Island on holidays. I told him about my holiday and he said, oh, can I come? So we went to Florida, we visited a number of small hop yards, and the USDA and Florida Uni saw how they were using lights. So we use a particular spectrum that was recommended by Florida Uni, but the actual small farms up to an acre, they were just using off-the-shelf LEDs. And they still worked. So lighting, winter dormancy, pests, like most regions have pests. Some can be regional specific. In Australia we're lucky we don't have a few of the major fungal pathogens that the US has. We don't have hop, powdery and downy mildew here in Australia, which means our farms don't have to treat with fungicide all the time. We do have spider mites, and we release predatory insects to control them, and we have clustering...
Like lady beetles or...?
No, they're a couple of really small predatory mites, and they're bred locally. There's a company, Bugs for Bugs, that supplies them to all sorts of farms, like berry farms and orchards and things. And lucky for us, it's the same kind of pests in hops. So we don't have to use any toxic or sort of harmful stuff in the yard, which is fantastic.
Nice. The hop breeding program, it's crazy, isn't it? It's like a decade's worth of thing before a new hop sort of comes out. Is that your sort of goal? Do you want to do any hop breeding with anything that you've got? Like, can you do that here, or is it too difficult with the vines so close? Or
to do a proper hop breeding program, as you say, it can take up to a couple of decades. Like maybe the shortest window to date might be like 10 years, 15 years, but it can be longer. And it's done all over the world. It used to be just places like the USDA doing it, the government in the US, but now like Yakima Chief Hops and different private companies do it. And then, you know, they release amazing new proprietary varieties. So at a very backyard amateur level, I've kind of started a variety development program. On my travels around Australia, I visited traditional hop growing regions that had grown hops since the 1800s. And so over that period of time, you know, hops get out of paddocks, they grow along riverbanks, people plant them in their yards. So I found feral hops growing in different traditional growing regions. I was picking cones and smelling them and going, oh, these smell awesome. And then I realized they had seeds. So I thought, oh, there's males out here as well. So I brought those seeds home, but I was able to germinate some. So I've got this small trial plot at a different location to this one. I've got about 60 odd plants growing, and this is the first season I'm doing it, so it's all new. But I've had maybe a quarter of the yard come up as males, and then the rest come up as females. So they're flowering and coning at the moment. And I was there last weekend checking it out, and I noticed that all of the female cones have seeds. So just by natural pollination. So my amateurish thoughts are that I'll probably pull out most of the males, or maybe all of the males, and maybe keep a few males at a separate location, and then just grow the females. So for a couple of seasons, I'm just recording like data on each plant, like the time it hits top wire, and I'll record the yield. And eventually my hopes are that one will look really good, it'll yield well. I'll send the cones off for analysis to a lab.
Check their acids and
acids and oils, and I'll probably do a full analysis with an oil component breakdown. And like the dream scenario would be like it's a good yield, or it grows well and it's got different characteristics. And then in theory, you know, that's a new variety because it's the result of, you know, sexual reproduction. And we can name it. But you know, it's a bit of a joke compared to what's normally done in commercial yards, because every season they're doing disease resistance, yield, time of flowering, because you know, if you're growing 1,000 acres,
terroir.
Ideally you want your plant to flower at a different time, so you're not trying to harvest in this tiny window. And they're even doing genetics now and looking at genetic markers. Like HPA have a variety development program, and they can rogue out all of the males straight up, I think, just based on genetic analysis. They can go, oh yeah, that's a male, that's a male. Whereas, mine is just a bit of fun.
It is becoming known that terroir does affect hops to a degree. Do you find, or have you had any feedback that any of your Cascade hops are different than, say, even just from Victoria or Tasmania? Or
there's a lot of unknowns with hops, and like this small scale sort of backyard production, much like the craft beer revolution around the world has taken off, there was a lag phase, and then this hop revolution has also taken off, like at a much smaller scale. And so people do report just in general the characteristics seem a little bit different. So at a research and academic level, I think a lot of the researchers and hop specialists are saying terroir is a thing, like, you know, a mosaic, or there's been some studies like Tom Shellhammer in the US has done some, and even some of the commercial yards in the US, like I think they did a bit of a trial where they grew Amarillo in the States and then Amarillo in maybe Germany, and then did sensory and did chemical analysis and did tasting, and they're saying, there's definitely differences. There are some people who argue that it's really hard to prove terroir. Because with hops, like if we harvest the hops at the start of the maturation window compared to the middle, compared to the end, you'll get variation in the analysis, and therefore the expression of aroma and flavour just throughout that. And so there's one guy I follow in the US, James Altwise, and he said, like, even in the same hop yard each successive year, you can get on-farm generation just with the different seasonal attributes,
Yep.
like the different weather, the different rainfall,
Yeah.
different heat, different cold. So you can get on-farm generation for the same plants on the same location.
Yeah.
So he's pointing out, using that as a base,
Yep.
it's hard to go definitively the yard
The clay
down.
soil or the rocky
Yeah,
shale is different
yeah.
to, yeah, okay.
But like anecdotally, people do definitely notice differences between hops grown in different regions. Yeah. So I think the acids that sort of correspond to the bittering potential in a hop, they kind of peak a little bit earlier and then plateau out, and then the oils, total oil volume, it peaks a little bit later in the pick window.
Yep.
So in the US, they've taken it to the extreme, and some breweries will visit the farms and sample, do sensory on the hops, and they'll specifically say, we want Mosaic from Smith's farm, and we want it late picked, and we want it
Yep.
from this paddock.
Yeah.
So they really get into it. Some people will argue, oh, that's just going over the top. It's crazy, but each to their own.
Yeah.
Like, it's awesome that they can do that, and farmers are sort of up for, okay, we'll accommodate what you want. From people I've spoken to and stuff I've listened to and read, it sounds like the craft beer revolution has saved components of the hop growing industry. So for example, through listening to interviews with some of the guys from HPA, I know that they, like, sort of in the, I don't know if it was the 80s or 90s, but a few decades back, they weren't looking good. Like,
Yep.
hops were really just for bittering back in the day. So industry term for buying hops was selling alpha or something like that,
Yep.
alpha acid. HPA were kind of on the way out. They were like, or whatever they were called back then, I'm not sure if it was the same name, going out of business, but it was variety development, the craft beer revolution, and people looking for more flavoursome, so rather than just bittering, like aromatic,
Yep.
flavour profile hops. And they released a few different varieties, and Galaxy was one that apparently initially showed limited interest, but at some point it took off. Like Stone and Wood made
Yep.
their Pacific Ale with
Yeah.
Galaxy. Some guys in the US got their hands on some and said, wow, this is really good, and saved the bacon.
Yeah.
So they were actually selling off land.
Yeah, right.
Like getting smaller rather than bigger.
Yep.
And now they're the opposite.
Yeah,
Like they
yeah, they can't find enough
get any
land.
more land in Tasmania
Yeah.
and Bushy Park, so they've been expanding. But yeah, that's why we're into it. Like
Yeah.
we've always, Steve and I and our mates have always loved sampling different kinds of beer. That was always a passion, and we've got friends that started home brewing. And Steve just said, do you want to try growing hops? Because he had these relatives that had this 1/4 acre, and I said, yeah, let's do it. And hobbies become like a bit of an obsessive passion,
Yeah.
as you can see.
Just a bit, yeah. All right, mate, well, thanks for chatting to us today. It's obviously, there's heaps more that I want to ask and talk about, so I reckon we're going to have another episode. Is that cool with you?
That's fine with me, mate.
Awesome.
I can talk about hops all day.
Awesome, thank you.
Cheers.